Now, I ain't one to brag, but if you've ever found yourself in a bar fight in Amarillo or been blacked out in Big Spring, chances are you heard the name Major Kong. Or maybe you just remember the mustache. Folks thinks I just showed up one day at the controls of a B-52, all cowboy hat and hellfire. But the truth is that trail started a long way from there, back in Tyler, Texas, with a busted fence, a mechanical bull, and some twitchy fella named Buck. Now, I don't mean to get all philosophical on y'all, because Lord knows I'm not qualified, but life ain't just some straight, logical line. It's more like a pinball machine rigged by a drunk mechanic. One minute you're headed for the jackpot, and then boom, you're ricocheting off of God knows what, catching sparks, spinning out, and before you know it, you're upside down in your drawers trying to remember where your boots went. So if you're looking for a straight line, buddy, you took the wrong exit. But either way, this here is the gospel truth, more or less. So I was born in 1940-something in a one-window shack where my mama ran a bootleg hair tonic business out of the cellar. And my daddy ran off with a lady from the Traveling Tent Revival, so I was 6 when he disappeared and 10 when I started riding cabs to earn cigarette money. So by 16, I could stay on anything with hooves and a pulse. So naturally, I found myself part of a rodeo outfit out of Dallas, and that's where I met old Buck, who I swear on my uncle's prosthetic leg was building this thing he called the mechanical bull, using stolen oil rig parts and what appeared to be a church organ. So I went right up to the fella and I asked him straight to his face, now why on earth would you be building such a thing instead of just using a real bull? Old Buck looked back at me dead in the eye and he said, real bulls are too moody, son. You need something with attitude and gears. Now, I was skeptical. I'd seen men get thrown halfway to heaven on live bulls, but old Buck swore this thing was a thing of the future. So I did what any red-blooded American teenager would. I stripped off my t-shirt, lit a Lucky Strike, and climbed on board. Now, I don't know if it was divine intervention or the moonshine Buck poured into the gear system, but that contraption bucked me so hard it tore through the barn wall, launched me 30 feet, and flung me right into the arms of the town librarian, who happened to be sunbathing in her underwear behind the grain bin. Now, that was the first time I'd kissed a woman older than my mom, and the first time I realized I had a calling, a talent, a gift. Not for kissing, mind you. For making dumb decisions look like strategy. So not long after that, I enlisted. Figured I'd trade bucking bulls for bombers. It turns out hanging on to jets ain't that different from hanging on to old Buck's mechanical bull. You just hold on tight, grit your teeth, and act like you meant to do it. But here's where the story gets a little strange. So years later, I'm stationed at a base in the middle of nowhere, someplace up in Wyoming. And what do you know, some Hollywood fellas show up looking for authentic American types. Said they're working on some movie with this big shot director named Stanley Kubrick. Now, I had no idea who or what a Kubrick was. Sounded like some fancy French chef to me. Apparently, they had originally brought in some actors from LA, some theater boys. They were too polished and too pretty. So now they were out here looking for the real deal. And they brought in all kinds of folks to read lines. But I wasn't even scheduled. I was outside showing the young ones how to arm wrestle. When one of the assistants spotted me and she said, hey, cowboy, you ever been in pictures? Now, I didn't know a screen test from a hole in the ground. I thought a callback was just a missed phone call. But I figured, what the hell? So I read the lines. I sat under those hot lights, squinting under the camera, and I'll be damned if something didn't happen. I didn't feel like I was acting. I felt like I was telling the truth, connected to every word. Every word out of my mouth felt like a story I'd already lived. They say Major Kong was written for some other big-name actor, but he dropped out, or maybe he got spooked when he read that final scene. But me, I read that thing and I saw my whole life flash before my eyes. The next thing I know, I'm in costume, strapped to a replica bomb, a fan's blowing dust in my face, and Kubrick's yelling, more, ride it harder. And y'all, I loved it. I loved every minute of it. I loved the spotlight, the chaos, the soundstage full of fake smoke. I loved that when I hooped and hollered and dropped out of the sky, people felt something. They laughed, they clapped. It was the first time I felt chosen. Not drafted, chosen. Like the country needed me again. Not as a soldier, but as a symbol. A cowboy with a cause. And that went straight to my head. Just like the moonshine. Man, that's the thing they don't tell you about myth making. It feels real good when it's happening, you know, like you matter, like you're right. But here's the part that snuck up on me. You ever play a part so long, the part starts playing you? You ever look down at something so terrible, a bomb, say, and think, well, maybe this ain't so bad if I'm the one riding it? Well, that's what happened to me. That nuke, it wasn't just a prop. It was a whole belief system. It was a manifest destiny with a warhead. It was toughness, patriotism, and showbiz all wrapped up together. And here I was riding it like I believed every word of it. And maybe I did. You know, war after war, we told ourselves that we were the good guys. And here I was, the face of it all, you know, grinning and yelling like it was still 1950-something and the world made sense. But it didn't. And the older I get, the more I see how many folks got crushed under that glory we were chasing. That toughness I was raised on, that silence, you know, don't seem to work no more. And maybe it never did. Turns out being a symbol ain't always a compliment. Not when the thing you symbolize ain't true, or kind, or useful. You know, at the time it felt like legacy. But now I see it different. You know, nuclear war ain't just another battle. It's the battle, the end of all battles. And deep down, even then, I think I knew I wasn't the hero. I was just the last chapter in a story. You know, that grin and that hoop and holler, that wasn't cowboy flair. It was a disguise. I was laughing so I wouldn't scream. Now I remember thinking, hell, I am Major Calm. And that's the danger, you know. You sit on a weapon long enough, you start thinking you're righteous for it. And I think somewhere down the line I got lost in it. Or maybe I found a version of myself that only existed in that story. And when the camera stopped rolling, it didn't just go away. You know, that image, me riding the bomb and yelling like a lunatic, it stuck in people's heads and history. Hell, it even made the poster. But let me tell you what I've come to believe. Sometimes, most times, the loudest voice in the room ain't the wisest. Sometimes the man screaming about bombs and borders and winning and what have you ain't brave. He's just terrified. Scared of what the silence might mean. You know, maybe real courage would have been walking away from that part, getting off that bomb. But I didn't. I wrote it all the way down and I've lived with that choice ever since. But the way I feel about it now, in hindsight, is maybe that I was living in a story that never had a happy ending to begin with. And that don't come from weakness. That comes from growing up right. You know, folks think small towns raise small minds. But where I'm from, you keep your word. You do right by your people every day, even when no one's watching. You show up, you listen, and you help. Not for medals or speeches, but because it's the decent thing to do. You honor the oath, not just the flag, and not just when it's easy. Liberty and justice for all, not just the folks that look like you and think like you and vote like you. So war ain't always the answer. And most times it's just what we say when we don't know how to talk anymore. And what I've come to realize is maybe the real danger wasn't just me riding the bomb, but it was believing that riding it made me righteous. That if I went out loud enough and wild enough, they'd call it brave. Sometimes the loudest exit just covers up the quietest truths. Now, I ain't blaming the movie, mind you. Strangelove was smarter than all of us, sharp enough to draw blood. Kubrick held up a mirror to the madness. The only trouble was, some of us liked what we saw. But still, it's kind of funny, ain't it? How a busted up kid from Poinsett County with a vice grip and a talent for falling in slow motion could end up immortalized like that. Not for courage, but for making it look like I had it. As it turns out, being a man ain't about dying for a cause. It's about living with the consequences. So, that's my story. You can laugh and you can cheer. But just remember, every myth's got a cost. Every cowboy's got a reckoning. And every bomb's got a fuse. And wouldn't you know it, it turns out mine was me.